Welcome to the Steering Change Podcast, navigating through the commercial transportation industry in Alberta and beyond, powered by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Here's your host, Kelsey Hipkin.
Hello, listeners of Steering Change. My name is Kelsey Hipkin, and I will be your host today. Don't forget to hang on after today's interview for the next Best Big Rig Movie Ever bracket chat with Rob Destree and myself. If you haven't heard of today's guest, you certainly will have heard of the publication Truck News. Truck News is a publication of family-owned and operated Newcom Media. Truck News covers the stories that matter most in Canada's and beyond commercial transportation landscape. The publication wouldn't be possible without the work of associate editor Leo Barros. A former truck driver himself, we are thrilled to be chatting with Leo today. Helping me is Dave Elniski of AMTA's Member Services team. Leo, Dave, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, happy to be here, Kelsey.
Thank you both. And Leo, to start us off, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with Truck News?
Yeah, my name is Leo Barros. I've been working with Truck News for the past 3.5 years now. I basically tell stories. I write about trucking issues, driver issues, immigration, regulations, associations, that kind of stuff. I just tell stories. I love telling stories.
We are going to delve into that love of storytelling a little bit later, Leo. But for now, Dave, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with AMTA?
Yeah, for sure, Kelsey. So I'm Dave Elniski, he, they pronouns, and I'm the Alberta Motor Transport Association's Industry Advisor in Safety and Compliance. So my work involves helping carriers, other companies, safety professionals, drivers, anyone else who reaches out just to help them with their questions related to both occupational health and safety, federal or provincial, and then also transportation-specific safety, like Canada's National Safety Code inspired regulations and US DOT compliance as well. And then I also work on internal projects, like helping with course development, instructing, and anywhere else where needed. I started in transportation as a trucker. I did that for a number of years, mostly long-haul flatbed work in like Western Canada and Western US and up north before going into fleet safety management. You know, outside of that, I've also been about 11 years in the Army Reserves now. It's mostly artillery, and then now I'm a truck driver in the Army as well. So even though I don't get to drive with the AMTA, but I get to do that a little bit still with the military. So yeah, I'm always happy to talk about things related to trucking, busing, and anything else related to safety management.
Thank you, Dave. And Dave does touch on safety management, but he's also a very proficient writer, which made him the best fit for today's co-host. So let's dive into that. Leo, you were also a truck driver once upon a time. How did you go from behind the wheel to telling stories about industry?
Well, basically, I've been a journalist for the past 25 years. So I started out as a journalist. I've worked in print media, newspapers across the world, worked in India, I worked in the Middle East, mostly editing, but I've been writing since 1996. So writing is not new to me. About 4 years ago, I decided to take a little change in my work schedule. I said, let's try trucking because I love driving. So I got my class 1 in 2020, and I drove long haul. So I did long haul trucking for not a long time, about 6 months or so. And then I found this role, which was writing about trucking, which I love. So I switched back and I joined Truck News 3.5 years ago. So this is a happy mix for me. I get to drive sometimes. I get to write about things that I love telling stories about. And I can also drive and write trucking. It's all perfect.
So you mentioned you do still drive sometimes. We are going to touch on that a little bit later. But can you tell us a bit about your process? How do you source what could be a good story or column versus what might not?
So there are different ways to source it. As journalists, we always keep our ears close to the ground. We get tips. People tell us stuff. We also look for things. We look for trends. We look for stories that are breaking. We have media resources. A simple press release might lead to something bigger. It's information, and we're always looking for information. And sometimes when something doesn't look right, we kind of dig into it. It's like, this thread that sticks out of a sweater, and you start pulling it and pulling it and pulling it. And we look at any story. The process is the 5 W's: who, where, what, when, why. But then, why do I want to write this story? Who will be interested in this story? What is the reason for writing this story? And we take it from there. We look at sources. I'll look for experts who'll be able to tell me more about the story. And we always tell both sides of the story. It's not one-sided. we check our facts, and we tell both sides of the story. If it's a column, then it's my opinion. And we mention that clearly that it's what I think it should be. That is my opinion. That is a column, a blog, or whatever. But when I write a story, I always make sure that both sides have a chance to say what they have to say, and it not be one-sided. The reader can form their own view of the story.
Just kind of curious, like what are some of the trending stories or hot topics, things that maybe get the most attention perhaps that you've been covering over the last year?
Our industry is made up of people who keep close tabs on what's happening. And a story I wrote last Friday, is really trending. It's about immigration, LMIAs. I spoke to your president, Robert Harper, last week, and I spoke to other trucking association executives as well. So this is a story where labor market impact assessments are being misused by certain people. It's happening in other sectors too, but I've focused on trucking because that's my field. That story trends, it's been trending. I also, when I write stories about driving schools, driver training, road safety, those kind of things also make the news. I remember one story I wrote about a truck driver who was arrested for carrying drugs in his truck. And finally, the courts found him not guilty of the act. It was just a lesson for people who haul stuff across the border, what they should look for, what they should not look for. And that story trended well as well. When I do stories about driving schools and then people jump on all of that, melt is a big issue because the number of hours required to train as a truck driver, does that actually make you an experienced truck driver? There are so many points of view over there. They talk about how finishing programs will help, but then who's going to fund that? That kind of stuff gets a lot of reader feedback as well. Hydrogen, EVs, electric trucks, people are interested in that as well. So these kind of topics, and also when we do videos about how to do this, or we just talk about stuff like this, where people pay attention to that kind of thing.
So I guess, to follow up on that then. So you're in Ontario right now speaking to us
Yes.
today. So in those stories, do you find there's differences between different regions of Canada, perhaps, and how they are received, or where they're, where some topics are more interesting in other areas than others? Like, do you notice any regional differences?
I would go with the regional similarities in terms of, let's say, a little town in Ontario decides to implement a trucking ban on their main streets. That resonates everywhere else because it's like a not in my backyard story that goes across the country. And I cover issues from coast to coast, but I also travel a lot into the US to cover conferences because our trucks, 80% of our trucks go south of the border. So we are enmeshed with the US. So I also do a lot of US stuff where I go for conferences, meetings, test drives as well. Into the US. So it's similar and sometimes it's different. It might be a hot topic in one province, certain things, and some things might not. But these small stories about parking issues, it happens everywhere. If one town bans truck parking in a certain area, if it happens in Ontario, you'll get people commenting on the story from BC. Oh, we have the same problem here. So it's, I think there are similarities more than differences. But yeah, if it's a very region-specific topic, you might get that kind of response. But a lot of trucking is just universal.
Yeah, that's fair. I often felt myself, like when I'm ever asked to describe the American trucking industry versus the Canadian one, they are much more similar than they are different. Yeah, the differences are critical to understand, especially in safety management, compliance, and all that. There's far more similar everywhere in this continent, I think, really, than we are different.
I
in
think
the trucking industry.
Yeah, I think you as a truck driver as well, if you didn't strap your load properly, no matter what the rules are, it becomes an unsafe load anywhere. Yeah.
So I guess so then kind of building on the work that you've been doing lately, I've noticed anyways that you've been test driving some new trucks. I think it was a Volvo relatively recently, but also would you like to tell us about some of that kind of work? Whether you want to focus on the new tech or the new features in these vehicles, but what have you kind of taken away from some of those experiences to test drive and write on those vehicles?
So I've been blessed to have been invited to test drive trucks. And just feel them out. So the most recent two was the new Volvo VNL in Virginia in June. This truck is not even out yet, and we got a chance to get up close, check out the interiors, check out the sleeping area, check out the trucks. And so I drove the 860, the 840, and the 660 around a test track. It was really cool. You get to tell people about the features, and this truck is built from the bottom up. It's a brand new truck. I think it's coming into market the fourth quarter of this year. Like you'll see it in, I think, dealerships end of this year. So this is something new, and we visited the factory as well. So we got a good look as to how these trucks are built. And you realize how many people, how many hours, and how much work it takes just to build a tractor. It's amazing to watch and see. And they let us get a deep dive into it. And they've got robots building parts of the truck. It's just really cool to watch. And then it was cool to drive the trucks. It's very interesting when you are one of the few people who can actually say you've driven a truck that has not hit the market yet. That was one. This month, I drove a Peterbilt in Seattle. It was fueled by CNG, which was very interesting. They had a new engine on it, the X15N on it. And it's very interesting because I didn't drive it on a test track. I drove it through the mountains. We drove through with a loaded trailer, 70,000 pounds on it. And we drove through little towns and through narrow roads. And it was strange because you don't smell any diesel in the truck. You're used to that. But it behaves like a diesel. It sounds like a diesel. It's very efficient. So that was one of the cool things. And I've got to tell you, I've driven a couple of EVs as well. So earlier this year at the work truck show, I drove a Bollinger B4, which is a class 4 truck. Very interesting. Instant torque, no sound, feels like a car. And that was loaded too. So it's very interesting how trucking is moving. Then I also drove the Rizon, DTNA's Rizon at Truck World in April. So did a test drive. And it's coming. The infrastructure might not be there yet, but the drives are very interesting. It gives you a kind of a peephole into what's going to happen. Well, for Dave, for you and me, a truck is loud. It has to make certain sound. It has to feel a certain way. The steering wheel vibrates in your hand, and then you have this quiet thing that can just smoothly do its job. Who knows? Long haul might have it in the future, but the future is here right now. So it gives you a nice view into what's going to happen.
One thing I'm curious about then. So you know how in anybody, you don't have to be in trucking to notice this, but like when car manufacturers put out new versions of vehicles, sometimes, this year's model year of whatever is that slightly different, maybe refined version of the last year.
Mm-hmm.
Then sometimes it's totally different. So sometimes a manufacturer changes things dramatically, and sometimes they're very similar. So obviously anything with an alternative fuel powertrain is, of course, very different from what the industry is used to, and that's still new technology for most people. But are you noticing manufacturers of, and maybe let's talk like the highway tractors, so we'll also talk about the sleeper and, the workstation, the driver's seat, all that. Are manufacturers these days is this very similar? Are they kind of converging, or are some manufacturers doing things that are really innovative, even in a traditional Class 8 diesel?
Yes. So the VNL, let's go back to that one. They have changed the way the truck feels. It feels like you're driving a car, only to realize that you're hauling 80,000 pounds of load behind you. They have improved how the steering works. You've got driver assist. The sleeper area has changed. The comfort controls, things like they've got wireless chargers in places where you wouldn't even think about wireless charging. Simple things like that. Storage has changed. The outlook of how much space a driver needs after he or she is done their day. Even the controls. Now you've got cameras monitoring the sides of your truck all the way down to your trailer. So you've got these two screens which are on the side. So you might not even need to look. Well, you have to look, but no mirrors anymore. And these work at night. So you've got infrared. Some of them have got trailer backup cameras, which are really helpful in the dark. some dark place, you can see all the way down. And they monitor your blind side. Think of yourself driving on the right lane, and then there is a ramp and somebody is merging, and you'll always find someone who's trying to, push in the front of you. You can't see them. The next thing you know, smack. These warn you. There's snow and rain. There's ice. These work well in bad weather too. Small things like that. They cost money, but they would save lives as well and save you that grief down the road, right? They are thinking in terms of comfort. Earlier, it was, this is your job, you're going to do it. Whether your back hurts, we don't care. Now it's, oh, there's a person behind the wheel. We have to take care of them as well. We have to look at their comfort. We have an aging workforce. It's getting hard to get young people in. A lot of technology is aimed at making a driver's job easier. So these kind of things, a lot of thought is going into this kind of process. And then in terms of the people who buy the trucks, they're helping them save on fuel. They are helping them anticipate maintenance. They're helping them where they can save money. In the end, trucking margins are very slim. So you have to help the carrier, the driver, and then I guess it trickles down from there.
And because this is always it's maybe not new technology, automatic versus manual transmissions, but as you test drive all these new vehicles, again, not counting the EVs and the hydrogen fuel cells, which this wouldn't apply, how often are you seeing a standard transmission in a vehicle?
Never.
Yeah, these new ones coming off the line. Is that pretty much a special order for a lot of these now, if you want to get it?
So I think those are focused on the jobs that they do. So you'll have to have manuals in, let's say, concrete or logging, heavy haul. You need a manual. But for most other jobs, an automatic works perfectly well.
No, they have come a long way. I remember most of my trucking was with an 18 speed, but the automatics I drove, even when I first started doing local work, some were rough. They were very challenging. There was very little ability to modulate the clutch on the semi-automated ones. But then you drive one a few model years later, and it's like, wow, they are working on this. This is really impressive how good they've gotten.
You still see trailer lag sometimes. I have a gentle foot. Now, if you stomp on the gas, it'll go. It'll screech, but it will go. But if you have a gentle foot like me, you might sometimes get trailer lag. So it'll start riding up the gears, and you'll feel a little bit of tug as you go. But that's just me. That's how I drive. But like you'll watch on the test track, you'll see people just stomping on the gas, and you hear the engine screech, and the truck goes pretty smooth, but it sounds awful.
Okay.
But it does the job, right? And I guess they've improved so much. So it depends how you drive as well.
No, that makes sense. You still see that debate in certain places online, manual versus automatic. But even regulators like Alberta will offer you can get your Class 1 license with an automatic, and they put the automatic endorsement on it now. That's
fair enough.
And we're not the only jurisdiction that does that. I think that just reflects the reality that no, automatics are largely the norm, anyways.
Yes, and also how many kids are learning to drive on a stick shift now? Not many.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So if they like their games, so they are used to technology, they're used to things being easier. And if you want young people to come in, you have to make it welcoming. And that's what is happening now. You'll see stuff that older drivers will go, nah, I don't need that, but it helps. I think the feedback that you get is more from the guys who've been driving 30 years, 40 years, but they won't be driving for long. They'll be gone. So I think manufacturers, fleets are all looking at the future, right?
No, that makes sense. That does make sense. Okay. Well, the next question is going to be a little shift of gears. So you have to work those trucking puns into these things. We're going to change lanes here a little bit.
Uh-oh.
It'll be the last one. Anyways, so in the last couple of decades, we've seen quite a shift in traditional journalism. So let's talk more about your craft, the writing craft, not the driving craft. So I'm curious, for those who might be news to our listeners, Kelsey also has a background in journalism, is an excellent writer. So I'll let our guest go first, but I'd like to get your input too on this. How are you and Truck News as well, perhaps, handling these shifts in today's media landscape from traditional journalism to whatever you want to call it that we've got now? No, I'll let you.
You want me to go first? Are you pointing at me, Leo?
Yep.
Okay, there you go, Kelsey. You're first.
Leo and I come from somewhat different eras of journalism. He's
A very polite way of saying Leo
that's how I was
is
going to say
older.
that. And I had a pretty short-lived journalism career. Mine was only about 3 years before I moved into the marketing and communications realm. But it was just that shift of you used to be boots on the ground. Leo talked about the importance of sources early on. You had your set sources, you met your deadline, the paper came out the next day. Sometimes it was a weekly. We still have a lot of weeklies. The community paper where I grew up is still a weekly newspaper, and that's how a lot of people get their information. But there's this whole other world where people want it now. There's the old ticker tape at the bottom of your television. We have Twitter, we have social media, it's hands-on. So there was a point where you saw a shift from this really like beautiful, rich, long-form journalism because people wanted things now and they wanted it brief. I will say, and I'm not sure if Leo has seen the same, but in recent years, it's almost like people are coming back to that sense of long form. They still want things now. They still want things right away. But there are certain stories out there that when people take the time to write this lengthy, rich, detailed piece, that people are really thirsting for that. So we're at a strange time. It's very interesting, especially with AI coming in now. I mean, we could talk about AI and journalism for another hour. But it's such an, I guess, undulating shift. But it's nice to see that we're coming back to our roots a little bit, but it has changed vastly. It's just, I want it and I want it now.
So what I'm kind of hearing then, okay, so it's been long form in the past, boots on the ground, a lot of field work. And then there's been now with social media, this explosion in like instant information. I want it right now, like a scroll, like a Twitter feed or an X feed or whatever. So are you kind of seeing then that the media landscape today, we're seeing that there is maybe space for both?
I would agree with Kelsey, and space for both, yes. So boots on the ground. I'm a big boots on the ground guy. I have driven from Toronto to Windsor for a story, a 600 km round trip. I will go and meet you. I prefer doing my interviews face to face, if possible. Sometimes it can be helped, but nothing beats meeting somebody face to face, asking the questions and getting the answers. That being said, the landscape has changed, yes. So I do write quick hit stories, maybe 300 words, get the information out. But you have to check your facts, check your sources. Nothing comes in the way of being accurate. You cannot give people information that is half sourced, that is not true. Also, I write features. And as you said, people are interested in that kind of stuff. We cater to people in the industry who know trucks, who know trucking. So they like to read stuff that informs. We also are online first. So whatever we do goes online first. We have a monthly magazine that comes out and we pick the best stories and it goes in print as well. But it's always online first. We are on social media as well. So we write a story and we post it on social media. LinkedIn is big for us. We use X as well. These platforms help reach a wider audience. People might click on the link and it takes you back to our site. We send out newsletters. We've got them daily. We have weekly newsletters. We'll send you daily newsletters about the stories that are fresh and new. We'll send you a weekly newsletter about our opinion pieces. We send you newsletters about the trending topics the past 2 weeks. We do products that are new in the market. We also go with sustainability. So we have a new newsletter which is called Zero In, and we cover that topic, green stuff that's happening now. We've also moved into video. So now we've started shooting video. When I was at Volvo's facility, I shot some video. And that gives people a nice insight into what's happening out there on the ground. We also do webisodes. So it's online, it's in print, it's a nice mix, but we make sure we get the information out in whatever way we can.
Okay, that video is something I want to ask a follow-up question on, and I want to open this to both of you then too. So I am not a journalist. Yes, I do a lot of writing, but I've never really journalism, with it being a craft, having its own code of ethics, like that kind of thing. I've never done that. So I'm curious then, is video really something the modern day journalist should really have in their toolbox? Is that something that really most journalists should be open to working into their work?
Sometimes you have to do things that you're not comfortable doing. That's fine too. If you look at people on YouTube, they point a camera at their face and just keep on going. That's mostly about them, and that's how they get their views. Here we are sharing information, so we turn the camera around on the topic that is being spoken about at that point. And now the term more is like a multimedia journalist. So you have to have all sorts of tools in your toolbox to be relevant to different types of audiences that you want to reach. So you might not reach them by a 1,000 word story, but a 2 minute video they might be interested in. So you have to find the medium that people are willing to access that information.
So is that a compromise in traditional journalist quality? Like, okay, we recognize that to get the message across, we have to use video. Or is this like,
No.
hey, video can actually enhance what we were also doing before?
So I would say enhance. So it's not just pointing at a random topic and saying this is what it's all about. We plan it, we source it, we talk to experts, and we get the information out. It's not like let's say somebody just points at something and says this is news. It's more about information. So I think it enhances what we do. It's just adding more tools in the toolbox.
To add to Leo's point, I think there's a line between journalism and influencer/content creation, and it's become quite blurred. The job of a journalist is to tell the story, to tell both sides of the story, as Leo mentioned, to tell the factual story, the hard facts. And I think that's something important to keep in mind when the sense of video. AMTA will do the odd video too, right? And yeah, it's important that we're telling the truth, we're telling the story. It's like Leo mentioned, so maybe we'll do a blog on a topic. For example, some of our trials for some of our test vehicles is very similar to the ones that Leo were mentioning. We have EV, there's CNG. AMTA has been trialing these vehicles as well. So we will tell you the story. It'll be on our website. We'll do a blog, and then we'll do a video. And people can take the words and tie it to the video, and it just helps with that learning and that education piece, right? And sometimes they're just scrolling on their phone, and this gives them an opportunity to check that out. Or they're more traditional and they're reading it. So it's just another tool in the toolbox. I think those are Leo's exact words, or yours, Dave, that you have to getting that outreach to people so you can educate them on what you're doing.
Okay. And I like that you touched on then, the influencers versus journalists, and how, for the average person, that distinction might really not be clear if they even see one at all. So Leo, for yourself at Truck News, and Kelsey and myself, for at AMT, I won't focus on one organization here. So I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but in general, then how can organizations balance that want to produce journalism content and share the truth and share stories, with also this sort of need to rank when it comes to search engine optimization and like get followers, so that there's also people who, so that people know that the source exists? Like, how can you kind of balance then this, like, hey, we need to be influencers to boost our following count from a marketing perspective, while retaining what makes good journalism good journalism?
I think people come to a site, or they are directed because you are bringing value to something. People come to trucknews.com because they know that what they're going to get is quality stuff written by people who know what they are talking about. It is properly sourced. You go to YouTube and you get John Joe doing something, and we don't know if he's being paid by somebody to do something. So we've got paid content on our site as well, but it is clearly labeled paid. That's where somebody pays for something. It's paid for. That's fine. We don't write that stuff. We don't do that stuff. We are separated like church and state. So when I write something, it's not being influenced by anybody. So I think that's where we draw the line. We bring out information for people in the industry who know what they are talking about, and we put it out there. So they come to a trusted source. And as long as you are a trusted source, I don't think you need to be an influencer. Your ranking, your stories will rise as long as you provide information that is trustworthy, that is informative, that helps, enhances knowledge, that kind of stuff. If you want to be an influencer, that's fine too. That is, your road, that's fine. But I think they come to us, they come to the AMTA site by whichever means you bring them in, by a tweet, by a post, by a newsletter, by printed stuff, but they'll come to you because they trust you.
Okay.
And I think that's some of the magic of journalism too, is building that trust and building those relationships, so you can go to people and say, can you tell me about this? And also, it's wearing a lot of hats. It's kind of the fun of it, right? Leo had mentioned one day he might be writing about safety standards, and the next he's driving a hydrogen vehicle or what have you. You get to learn so much about so many things and use that in your journey. And Leo also did touch on some details of Truck News's print and online offerings as well as their newsletters. For our listeners, keep an eye on that in our show notes. You guys, amazing conversation today, but unfortunately, I'm going to start winding it down to the end here. Leo, is there anything else you would like to add after today's chat?
For sure, I would just say keep reading the work that we do, keep coming to our sites. We are always trying to get as much information out as quickly as possible. Keep reading, watching, and also engage. We love when people comment on our stories. We like when you call us and say, hey, we have this story for you. So yeah, just keep in touch and keep on reading our work.
Well, I know I will be. Big fan of yours, Leo.
Thank you very much.
And Dave, thank you so much for joining the conversation today. Your insights are always invaluable. Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, thank you, Leo. It's always great to have an opportunity to chat, and hopefully I'll be able to see you again in person at some event in the future, perhaps. And Kelsey, I appreciate you bringing me on as a co-host. One thing I would add just for the listeners is that, we talked about journalism today and the truth and getting good content. Yeah, and then social media influencers aren't necessarily, that's not necessarily what they're always attempting to do, if at all. And, I'm often asked sometimes, like in my writing, whether it was my previous role in a private company, sometimes it's like, hey, can you take this topic and can you distill it down into the soundbite? Can you distill it down into this? And yeah, you often can. But the reason why, in the trucking industry, I'm going to just talk about safety management, why legislation is long and standards are big, is because the details matter. They do. So when you found a source, whether it's a writer, a journalist like Leo, or an organization like Truck News or the AMTA, like whatever, however you want to get your information from, or you're going right to the regulator. Yes, there's a place for those. Okay, can I get the information really quickly off my LinkedIn scroll, my LinkedIn feed? But that won't always, in fact, in safety management often won't replace the actual content itself. So yes, if we can find a way to really quickly communicate a principle in legislation in 30 seconds in a video, that's great. And sometimes that can be done. But there's a reason why the legislation is the way it is. And in safety management, we can't lose sight of that. And we have to remember that we have to be comfortable in that kind of that black and white Times New Roman 100 pages kind of content as well. So that's kind of what I'll leave away with this.
So I will say to our members, if you have a story idea or a question, Leo is your go-to. We'll have that in the show notes. And if you have any questions on legislation, Dave is your go-to on the AMTA front. I just want to thank you both for sharing this information today. We really do appreciate your knowledge and your time. We will now throw to Rob Destree for our latest Best Big Rig Movie Ever bracket segment. Rob.
All right, podcast listeners. Kelsey and I are back for the Best Big Rig Movie Ever 70s and 80s edition. Today's bracket has us pitting Smokey and the Bandit versus Highballin'. What say you, Ms. Hipkin?
I say Smokey and the Bandit from 1977. I'm going to give a trigger warning with this one for some racist undertones. A very popular film, as you know. I'm going to let Rob do the rundown on this one.
I mean, what more do you need? You've got Jerry Reed, classic, iconic song that he apparently wrote in about 40 minutes. You have Fred the Dog. You have a truck. You have a Trans Am. You have Burt Reynolds. You have peak Burt Reynolds. The stash, on point. Right? The hat, on point. You have Jackie Gleason, and yeah, you're right. There's a lot there to be. It was the 70s. It was the 70s. It was a different time. Jackie Gleason reminds me much of my father of the era. So it has a special place in my heart because, again, that's one of those movies that you watched over and over and over again as a young guy, and your father watched and your brothers watched and everything as well. So it holds a place near and dear to my heart. And of course, you have Sally Field. I mean, what more do you need with Sally Field? She played Frog so well.
I will give that to Sally. Sally had a banging year in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s and today. I will admit this is the first time that I have seen this film was for recording this bracket. I was pleased to see that it opened at a truck rodeo, us having come off of our professional truck driving championship this past June. And I did want to note director Hal Needham. He also directed the cult classic BMX film Rad, which was filmed in the Cochrane area.
Oh,
So,
I didn't know that.
fun fact.
Oh, fun fact. But I also know that he also did the other classic, which is Cannonball Run. So there's that.
Another film that I have not seen and which we did neglect to put on this particular bracket.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, there's one or two scenes in there that are truck driving-ish. But also a classic, because again, Hal Needham being a stunt guy, all of his stuff was pretty much oriented towards the stunts. Just the amount of cars they trashed in the Smokey and the Bandit doing the jumps. I think they only had 3 Trans Ams given to them. And by the end, none of them were running. So there's that. So I have to go 5 CB radios out of 5 on this bad boy.
I am going to decrease that. I will say you do see a lot of the truck driver camaraderie. You see the support from the drivers for the Bandit as he is on his multi-state chase with the Texas Sheriff Buford T. Justice. Favorite line in this one was, "Put your foot on the floor, we've got your back door." However, I did give this a 2.5 out of 5 CB radios.
Blasphemy.
The question is, was it as good as 1978's Highballin' starring Peter Fonda, Helen Shaver, and again, Jerry Reed?
Yep. Jerry, again, another one, Jerry Reed being Jerry Reed. The plus for this, it was filmed in Ontario. The minus for this, it was filmed in Ontario. So it was filmed, I think, over a span of maybe 3 months. And you can tell because the scenes bounce back and forth between no snow to snow to no snow to snow. And my poor little OCD brain does not like that. So there's something to be left to be desired in the continuity department. However, that being said, how many other times are you going to see a guy drift the truck with a load of cars in the back? And Fonda did pretty much most, or if not all, of his own stunts. So I will give him credit for that. I don't know that he was properly suited for that role.
He is a Nepo baby, and I will give him props for those stunts. He just felt almost too pretty to play the gritty, street smart Rain.
Agreed. It reminded me of if I put David Bowie in that role.
Okay, I can see that.
Labyrinth with a truck.
Labyrinth with a truck would not be, actually, I would almost sign up for that.
All right. So I have to go maybe 1.5 CB radios on this, and only because, again, Jerry Reed's in it, and it was filmed in Canada, and it has that drifting a truckload of cars. Beyond that,
I was feeling a little more generous with this one. Maybe it's Helen Shaver, whose call name was Pickup. As a clever lady driver, she helped out the fellas a lot. Again, there was a series of big rig hijackings, and the Duke and Fonda, known as Rain, were able to thwart that. Shaver, of course, from cult classics like Desert Hearts. I gave this one a 2.5 as well. So Smokey and Highballin' both got a 2.5 out of 5 CB radios for me on this round.
so you're calling that one a tie then, are you?
Yes, sir.
All right. Kelsey and I have weighed in, podcast listeners. What do you think? Reach out to us on our social medias. Should it be Smokey and the Bandit moving on, or should it be Highballin'? Kelsey?
First, I want to thank everyone who chimed in on Breaker Breaker versus The Duel. Once we have completed this round, we will be announcing the winners who have moved on to the next bracket. For our socials, you can find us on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We look forward to hearing from you and who will come out on top this time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of AMTA's Steering Change Podcast. The views expressed by guests of the Steering Change Podcast are their own and may not reflect the views of AMTA, its hosts, or sponsors. Do you have a question that you would like answered on an upcoming episode of the Steering Change Podcast? We want to hear from you. To submit a question to the Steering Change Mailbag, hit up our DMs on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram with the hashtag Steering Change, and your question will be answered either live on the podcast or by one of our SMEs here at AMTA. We ask that you share this episode with those in your network that could benefit from what we discussed today, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you can be notified when future episodes are released. You can learn more about us and our mission by visiting www.amta.ca. Now get out there and have a safe day.